Yeah, and I think it is coming out of this experience that a lot of us who work with young adults, emerging adults, college, post-college, like it is a pretty much a continual conversation that we're having in some way, shape, or form. Like, and if it's not like it's not just about like university or career, it's about like, should I marry this person? Should I break up with this person? Should I live with this group of people or this person? Or should I move to wherever? Like there's just so many big decisions that are happening like between the ages of 18 and 27 that this is a pretty much a constant pertinent question that is often being navigated. And so it feels very acute.
Yeah.
All of the time. So I think that's something that we're talking about. And the reason why I think it's so important to talk about.
Yeah.
And so I think that to some degree or another, it might be helpful to help define then what is God's plan. Like because it's something that we talk about so much and so often, as kind of people who do this pretty frequently with others, when you guys say, what is God's, like when someone says like, is this God's plan for my life? How is it that you respond most of the time?
That's a good question.
That is a good question. Yeah, that is a good question.
I think one of the first things that comes to my mind is to know him and to make him known.
Right.
That like God's plan for us is to know him, to be in relationship with God, and then out of that to make him known to the world. And that happens in the way that we live, in a way that reflects God's kingdom. That happens in the way that we go and make disciples, like the Great Commission says. That happens in the way our behavior interacts with other people. We get to do that in a lot of ways. That's not just like evangelism or explicitly sharing the gospel. But it's, God's plan for us is to know God, to be in relationship with our loving and creative Father, and that out of that, the making him known comes as we live in step with his kingdom. And that's what I tell people God's plan is, and God's will for our lives is that a lot of other stuff is secondary to that like big picture plan that God has for us.
Yeah, totally. I think the first thing that came to my mind is a similar phrase. It's kind of maybe just another way to say it, but is to love and be loved. To like accept the love of the Father and to let that guide your relationship with him and your identity, and then to go out and love others out of that. Like that is God's plan and that is God's will, that you do that in any circumstance that life leads you through, in any tragedy, in any season, anything. But I think a lot of times what people are actually asking when they're asking this question, and we talk a lot on this podcast about how important language is and kind of like getting the language correct around things, is more like, where is God's Spirit guiding me?
Yeah.
And I think that can vary. I mean, that is situational. That is personal. That is unique to each person and exactly what decision they're going through and exactly what season they're in. And God's Spirit does guide us and lead us toward things and away from things and all of that. And but when it comes to God's will and God's plan, there is an answer to what that is, and it doesn't change with the times, the seasons, or the person.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I think that you're both super correct in that. And I think that the way we often think of God's plan is being very specific and very particular. And God's plan is for me to get married. God's plan is for me to be single. God's plan is for me to like get this job or that job or move to this city or that city. And I think that that's how I thought about it sometimes, but I think how I see it being thought about often is God's plan is this path. But I really think that you're right, Kenna, that he might have specific like leanings for you, and he might have some places where it's like, no, I'm more drawn this way, I'm feeling led this way, but ultimately none of those are his plan. Like, his plan for you is to be in relationship with him so that he can bring about goodness in your life unto others. Like, that's his plan for every single person that he's created. And I think like there's a lot of, I mean, personally, I find some freedom in that, because I think that brings some recognition of like, I might make mistakes, but I can't get it wrong.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like, I might make choices like throughout life. I'm going to make mistakes. But I can't, like, if I'm pursuing the Lord, I can't go outside of his plan.
Because that in and of itself is his plan.
That is his
to
plan.
pursue the Lord.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what I hear you guys saying is that it's a differentiation, and I think that's a super helpful idea to really draw out, is that God's plan is solely found within a friendship with God, of receiving the love of the Father, like being in a friendship with God, and then also making that known or showing that love to the world. Like, that's the whole plan. What we're talking, like, and that's really important to say, like, God's plan for you is not hidden.
Yeah.
Like, that is knowable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like Colossians 1:28, literally, like, in this idea that the mystery that has been kept hidden from the ages and generations, but is now disclosed to the Lord, to the Lord's people. To them, God has chosen to make known among the Gentiles the glorious riches of the mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. Like, you have been shown, God's mystery has been revealed. Like, his plan for you is to experience his love and to show it. Like, that's the whole plan. However, what most people mean when they say God's plan is like, what am I supposed to do with my life?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Like in what, and so I think that is the point that we want to be sure that we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
We want to talk about, how do you discern, and what does it look like for you to live out God's plan in particular contexts, right? That God's plan is not an external thing,
Right.
out there, like that you are trying
that you have to discover.
Yes, yeah. That is some mystery that you don't understand and you don't know. That's my bird clock for any of you guys.
We
who
couldn't
aren't
hear
watching
it.
this online. I'm at home right now, and then there's a bird clock that goes off in my house at the top of every hour. Anyhow.
That's amazing and so Shell-State-y.
Yes, it's true. But so, like, God's plan is not a mystery, like is not a mystery that's known, but the context or the way that and then my neighbor kid is here. I'll be right back.
I think one thing off of that is I think it's important to not just say, okay, yeah, we recognize that God's plan is this, but what do I do with my life? Like, I think sometimes I remember, like, I spend so much of my week encouraging other people in this kind of thing, and like kind of guiding other people and pointing other people in the truth of this. But then when it's my own life, it's, I think we all experience that. It's like a lot harder to sometimes remember the things for ourselves. And so I remember, it wasn't that long ago, I don't even honestly remember the decision that I was making, but I was kind of going through this process of like, okay, am I supposed to do this or am I supposed to do this? Like, what is it that like the Lord has for me? And I think I was talking to you, Josh, at some point, and I was trying to process, like, I don't think God has clearly given me an answer of yes or no, and someone was encouraging me in the very thing that we're talking about. Someone was encouraging me, and they were saying, God's will for you is to know him and make him known. Like, just remember that that is the most important thing. And I was like, yeah, I know that, but I want to figure it out. I want to figure out the right thing that is God's plan for me. And so I think just what you're saying, Garret, I think is true and important, but I think it's also valuable to not separate them as much, because I think when I do that in my life, I have a tendency to almost neglect the big picture truth of God's will and God's plan for me. And I still want to find the right answer, but looking at it in a more holistic way, like you're kind of closing out your thought there before the dog, and saying like, this is God's plan for me to know him, to love him, and to make him known. And through that, there are that has particular implications on like the decisions that I make in my life, that it's not this separate thing and then there's my day-to-day decisions. I think that's been helpful for me to process, because I kind of, the restlessness is really prevalent there.
Sure. Well, and the reason that I think it's important to go through that order is because then you're asking, in what context is best, or is God leading me to live out his plan for my life? That there is a way that we can find a particular space that sometimes God is calling us into to live out that context. But the issue is that if we think God's plan exists somewhere out there for us, then those external things will never fulfill the experience of being loved and showing love. And so when we are continually pressing into this spot where we're saying, what's God's plan for me is somewhere out there, it's external. Like it's rather than seeking the covenant or the friendship with God that we are being renewed by and sustained by, we're using all of our energy trying to figure out what God's plan is somewhere out there, rather than experiencing that and then discerning by God's Spirit, what context, God, are you directing or leading me to live your plan for my life?
Yeah, that's helpful.
Right?
Yeah, yes. Totally. And because that's so true, because it's just all context for this one purpose that is knowable, that is not hidden from you, that does not change throughout the seasons of your life. Everything else changes, and there's so many decisions. And to your point, Josh, you can make mistake after mistake after mistake, and it will not change that purpose. It'll just change the context through which you live it, and sometimes maybe how difficult it is to live it or whatever. And we'll get to talking too about like the ways that God's Spirit does guide and lead us. But I think that's a really helpful kind of word and way to think about it, G, is like that the rest is context.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Do I live out that context in singleness? Do I live out that context in this college, in this city, at this job, with this group of friends? Like, in what context am I living out this friendship?
Yeah. And there's a balance in that because I think the importance of that and the beauty of that is your context matters, and of course you want to figure out what that context is for your life, but there's also a level of there's a balance of recognizing that you're free, that you get to live your life freely, not believing that you can you're gonna do it wrong, that you're gonna go down a path that God can't move in anymore, that you're excluded from his plan, that you're excluded from his will anymore. That is the thing that we get to be free from, that we often put on ourselves and add a whole lot more pressure. And I think that's not what God wants for us. He wants you to operate out of an abundance of knowing him and experiencing him, so that overflows into whatever context you're in. So there's this balance of recognizing there might be some contexts that are better for you in living out that plan, but that's really it doesn't exclude anything. It might be better in terms of you might enjoy it more sometimes, or it might be a little easier here, or it might be more challenging for you in this season, but in all of it, God is bigger, and that he can redirect whatever context you're in for his will, for his plan. And that gives us so much freedom, especially in a world where we're told you're defined by what you do. You're defined by what you accomplish, what you achieve.
Yes.
And when when we have that truth of recognizing that that we're free from that defining us at all, and instead like we just get to like live our life, enjoy the life that was God has given to us in any context we're in, and that we can live into his plan wherever that is. And I've had to learn that a lot because I've attached so much pressure to my career being the thing that accomplishes his plan for me.
Yeah.
And that just isn't true.
Right.
Yeah. One clarifier, there are particular contexts that you cannot live out God's plan.
Yes.
So for example, you can't be in the Ku Klux Klan and work out your plan for God's life. Like that's just like a context to not do that. Now, I mean, like, I guess if you were born into a Ku Klux Klan family and you are trying to navigate what that means. Anyway, all I have to say is like, if you're asking God, like, should I join the Ku Klux Klan? Like this, no, you shouldn't.
Right. Because we're saying it's under discipleship of Jesus that you can't mess up God's plan for you, because the 100%. Plan is to be a disciple of Jesus.
Yeah,
so
living into sin isn't his plan.
Right. So when you're not pursuing
Correct.
that, I think that's a good caveat.
Yeah.
Good clarifier there.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, like it, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you can stay tuned for all of our content.